I stood there watching concrete barriers seal off my ranch gate forever. The sound of the cement mixer echoed across my 50 acres like a death sentence. Karen Martinez smiled as she directed the contractor, her perfectly manicured finger pointing exactly where to place each barrier. "There," she said with satisfaction. "No more ugly farm trucks ruining our neighborhood." My horses watched from the pasture, confused why their feed delivery would never come through that gate again. 3 generations of my family had used that entrance. 43 years of legal access, wiped out by one woman with a clipboard and an attitude. But Karen Martinez had no idea what she just started. She thought she was dealing with some simple rancher who would roll over and accept defeat. She was about to learn that some people fight back harder than she ever imagined. That morning, I made a phone call that would destroy her completely. 5 years ago, I thought I had found paradise. After decades of working double shifts at the steel mill, saving every penny, I finally had enough money to buy the ranch of my dreams. 50 acres of rolling hills, mature oak trees, and a weathered red barn that looked like something from a postcard. The property came with everything I needed: horse stables, hay storage, equipment sheds, and most importantly, a private gate that connected directly to Willowbrook Road. The previous owner, an elderly rancher named Frank Henderson, walked me around the property with tears in his eyes. "Been in my family since 1978, Frank told me as we stood by the gate. "This entrance saved my life more times than I can count. Hay trucks, veterinarians, feed deliveries. Could not run a ranch without it." I shook his weathered hand and promised to take good care of the place. Frank smiled and handed me a thick folder of paperwork. "Everything you need is in there. Property surveys, gate permits, road easements. Keep it safe." Those first months were magical. I woke up every morning to the sound of horses nickering for breakfast. I installed new fencing, repaired the barn roof, and planned where to expand the stables. Neighbors from the subdivision across the road would stop and wave as they drove past. Everything felt perfect. Then I met Karen Martinez. She appeared at my front door on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, wearing a bright yellow blazer that made her look like a human traffic cone. Her smile seemed friendly, but her eyes were cold and calculating. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I am Karen Martinez, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to personally introduce myself and make sure you understand our community standards." I invited her in for coffee, thinking this was just a neighborly visit. Karen sat at my kitchen table and pulled out a stack of papers that looked thicker than a phone book. "Now, I know your property is technically outside our main subdivision," she began, "but according to our records, you are still subject to certain HOA covenants and restrictions. We want to make sure everyone maintains property values." My coffee grew cold as Karen explained rule after rule. No commercial vehicles visible from the road. No livestock within 50 feet of the property line. No structures that could be considered unsightly or agricultural in nature. "I run a ranch," I said slowly. "I have horses, tractors, and hay deliveries. This is agricultural property." Karen's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her expression. "I understand your confusion, but covenants are covenants. We have worked very hard to maintain the character of this neighborhood." She left me with a welcome packet full of restrictions and warnings. As I watched her yellow blazer disappear down my driveway, I felt the first cold finger of dread touch my spine. Something told me Karen Martinez was going to be a problem. The first complaint arrived 3 weeks later. Karen had sent it certified mail, as if she were serving legal papers. The letter accused me of violating HOA covenants by allowing unsightly commercial vehicles to use my private gate. My crime: a hay delivery truck had backed through the gate to unload bales in my barn, the same gate that had been used for agricultural purposes for over 4 decades. I called Karen immediately. This gate has been used for ranch operations since 1978. The previous owner never had problems. Well, I was not president then, Karen replied coolly. Standards have changed. We have new leadership now. The monthly HOA board meeting was held in the community center of Willowbrook Estates. I arrived early, hoping to present my case reasonably. The room smelled like burned coffee and disappointment. 5 board members sat behind a folding table that looked like it came from a church basement. Karen called the meeting to order with the authority of a Supreme Court justice. When my name came up on the agenda, she gestured for me to approach the front of the room like I was a defendant. "State your case," she said, as if doing me a tremendous favor. I pulled out Frank Henderson's folder and spread the documents across the table. Property surveys from 1978, gate permits signed by the county, road easement agreements that clearly established my right to use the entrance. This gate has been legally used for agricultural purposes for 43 years, I explained. Every document proves my right to access. The board members examined the papers with interest. I thought I was making progress. Then Karen leaned forward and smiled. "These documents are very old," she said dismissively. "HOA covenants take precedence over outdated agreements. The gate creates safety hazards and reduces property values." Safety hazards? I could not believe what I was hearing. It is a farm gate on my own property. "Large trucks backing onto our road create dangerous conditions," Karen continued. "Children play in this neighborhood. We cannot allow industrial traffic." One board member, a man named Robert Chen, looked uncomfortable. "Karen, these documents seem pretty clear about his rights." Karen's smile froze. "Robert, covenants exist for a reason. If we make exceptions, where does it end?" The meeting dragged on for 2 hours. Karen presented her case like a prosecutor, complete with photographs of my hay truck and complaints from unnamed neighbors. She demanded the gate be permanently sealed within 30 days. "This is ridiculous," I said, standing up. "You cannot just eliminate access that has existed for decades." "Watch me," Karen replied. I left that meeting knowing I was dealing with something more than a concerned neighbor. Karen Martinez was on a mission to control everything in her domain, and my ranch gate represented a challenge to her authority. The next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. 30 days to seal the gate permanently or face daily fines of $500. Karen had attached a list of approved contractors who could perform the work. I sat on my porch that evening, watching my horses graze in the golden light of sunset. For the first time since buying the ranch, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But giving up was not in my nature. I pulled out my phone and called the law office of Harrison and Associates. If Karen Martinez wanted a fight, she was about to get one. Attorney Michael Harrison listened to my story with the patience of a man who had heard every property dispute imaginable. His office overlooked downtown, and through the windows, I could see the courthouse where my fate might eventually be decided. "Show me everything," he said. I spread Frank Henderson's documents across his mahogany desk. Property deeds, survey maps, gate permits, road easements. Michael studied each paper with the focus of a detective examining evidence. "This is interesting," he murmured, pulling out a magnifying glass to examine one particular document. "Very interesting indeed. What did you find?" Michael leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. "When was the last time you looked at these survey maps?" "Not since I bought the property." "Why?" He pointed to a section of the survey that showed property boundaries. "According to this 1978 survey, your property line extends 15 feet beyond your gate. Do you know what that means?" I shook my head. "It means you own part of Willowbrook Road, the section that provides access to the entire subdivision." My heart stopped. "Are you sure?" Michael pulled up county records on his computer. "Let me verify this with current filings." His fingers flew across the keyboard as he cross-referenced property boundaries with county road maps. "Holy shit," he whispered, then caught himself. "Excuse my language, but this is extraordinary." "What exactly are you saying?" Michael turned his computer screen toward me. The county property database showed my lot number extending across what everyone assumed was public road. The original ranch property included the access road to service agricultural operations. When they built the subdivision in 1985, they assumed the county owned the road. They never checked the property records. I stared at the screen in disbelief. "So the HOA has been using my road for 20 years. Without permission, without easements, without legal right." Michael's excitement was palpable. "They are trespassing every single day." The next morning, I received another certified letter from Karen. The deadline for sealing my gate had been moved up to 48 hours. She had hired Morrison Construction to install concrete barriers whether I agreed or not. "Emergency safety measures," her letter explained. "The HOA board has voted to take immediate action." I called Michael Harrison immediately. "They moved up the deadline. They are installing barriers day after tomorrow." "Perfect," he said. "Let them." "What do you mean, let them?" "Every action they take against your gate is additional evidence of harassment and property rights violations. Meanwhile, I will file paperwork to establish your ownership of that road section." I hung up feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Either this plan would work, or I would lose everything. That afternoon, I drove slowly down Willowbrook Road, looking at it with new eyes. 96 homes used this road as their only access to the outside world. School buses, delivery trucks, emergency vehicles, daily commuters, all of them crossing my property without permission. I parked at the end of the road and walked back toward my gate. Every step I took was on land that belonged to me, land that Karen Martinez had no authority to control. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop fighting the gate closure or face serious consequences. This is your final warning." I deleted the message and smiled. Karen Martinez had no idea what was coming. The next day, I watched from my kitchen window as Morrison Construction arrived with concrete barriers and a cement mixer. Karen Martinez stood there directing the operation like a general commanding troops. "Right there," she pointed. "Make sure no vehicle can get through." I could have stopped them. One phone call to Michael Harrison and a court injunction would have shut down the whole operation. But I let them work. Every barrier they installed was another nail in Karen's coffin. By evening, my ranch gate was permanently sealed. 43 years of agricultural access eliminated by one woman's ego and a few tons of concrete. Karen Martinez thought she had won. She had no idea the war was just beginning. That night I could not sleep. I sat at my computer until 3 in the morning, digging through public records and HOA documents. If I was going to war with Karen Martinez, I needed to understand my enemy. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was in worse financial shape than I imagined. Their reserve fund was nearly empty, and they had taken out loans to cover basic maintenance. Monthly dues barely covered operating expenses. More interesting was Karen's history. She had been HOA president for 6 years, winning elections by intimidating opponents and making examples of anyone who challenged her authority. Online reviews of the neighborhood mentioned her name repeatedly, always in negative contexts. I created a spreadsheet of every complaint and fine Karen had issued over the past 2 years. The pattern was disturbing. She targeted anyone who stood out, anyone who dared to be different. A retired teacher fined for having too many garden gnomes. A veteran penalized for flying an American flag that was supposedly too large. A young mother cited for children's toys being visible from the street. But the most shocking discovery came from the HOA financial records. Karen had authorized payments to her brother's landscaping company for over $50,000 in unnecessary improvements. Her husband's security firm received a contract for neighborhood patrols that nobody requested. Karen Martinez was not just a control freak. She was stealing from her neighbors. The next evening, I knocked on the door of Robert Chen, the board member who had seemed uncomfortable during my gate hearing. His house was a modest 2-story colonial with a perfectly maintained lawn. "I remember you from the meeting," Robert said, inviting me inside. "Sorry about how that went." We sat in his living room while his wife served coffee and homemade cookies. Robert looked exhausted, like a man carrying a heavy burden. "How long have you been on the board?" I asked. 3 years, biggest mistake I ever made." Robert rubbed his temples. "I ran because I wanted to help the neighborhood. I had no idea what I was getting into." "Karen seems pretty intense." Robert laughed bitterly. "Intense is one word for it. She runs the HOA like her personal kingdom. Anyone who disagrees gets destroyed." "What do you mean?" Last year, board member Sarah Williams questioned some of Karen's spending decisions. Within a month, Sarah received citations for 17 different violations. Her mailbox was the wrong color. Her driveway had oil stains. Her garbage cans were visible from the street for 10 minutes after pickup. Robert's wife nodded grimly. Sarah sold her house and moved away, could not take the harassment anymore. "That sounds illegal." "Probably, but who has the money to fight it? Karen has turned the HOA into her personal law firm." I leaned forward. "What if I told you there might be a way to stop her?" Robert's eyes lit up with hope. I would say, "Tell me everything." Over the next week, I had similar conversations with 3 other neighbors. Margaret Foster, whose garden gnome citation had cost her $2,000 in fines. James Peterson, the veteran who was forced to take down his American flag. Lisa Rodriguez, the young mother who paid $1,500 for toy violations. Each conversation revealed the same pattern. Karen Martinez ruled through fear and intimidation. She had created a neighborhood where people were afraid to express themselves, afraid to be different, afraid to challenge her authority. But fear works both ways. I called Michael Harrison and told him about the financial irregularities I had discovered. Within days, he had requested a formal audit of HOA finances and filed complaints with the state attorney general's office. "This is bigger than your gate," Michael told me. "Karen Martinez has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a homeowners association." "How long before we can move on the road ownership?" Paperwork is almost ready, but I want to coordinate with the criminal investigation. When we hit her, it needs to be from every angle at once. I hung up feeling like a general preparing for the final battle. Karen Martinez had spent years building her empire of control and intimidation. In a few weeks, I was going to bring it all crashing down. On a Tuesday morning in early October, I watched from my kitchen window as a county surveyor drove slowly down Willowbrook Road, stopping every few feet to take measurements. Behind him, a crew from Harrison and Associates installed bright orange signs every 50 yards. Private property, no trespassing. Road usage subject to owner permission. Unauthorized use prohibited by law. My phone started ringing at exactly 8:47 a.m. Karen Martinez sounded like she was having a stroke. "What the hell are those signs?" she screamed into the phone. "Legal notices," I replied calmly. "Required by law when reclaiming private property." "Reclaiming? You do not own the road." "Actually, I do. County records confirm my property extends 15 feet past the gate you just sealed. That includes the section of road your entire subdivision uses for access." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. I could hear Karen breathing heavily, processing the implications. "This is impossible," she finally whispered. "Check the records yourself. Lot 47B, surveyed in 1978. Your HOA has been trespassing on my property for 20 years." I hung up and poured myself another cup of coffee. Within an hour, I counted 17 cars driving slowly past my property, their occupants staring at the orange signs like they were written in a foreign language. The emergency HOA board meeting was called for that evening. I arrived 30 minutes early and took a seat in the back row. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. Karen Martinez looked like she had not slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and her yellow blazer was wrinkled. She called the meeting to order with none of her usual authority. "We have a situation," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "Someone is claiming to own part of our access road." "It is not a claim," I said, standing up. "It is a legal fact." All heads turned toward me. I walked to the front of the room and placed a stack of documents on the table. Property surveys from 1978, current county records, legal opinions from 3 different attorneys. Your subdivision was built on land that includes part of my property. Board member Robert Chen picked up the documents and began reading. His face went pale as he processed the information. "These look legitimate," he said quietly. "They are forgeries," Karen screamed. "This is a scam." Michael Harrison entered the room at that moment, carrying a briefcase and wearing the confident smile of a man holding 4 aces. "Good evening," he said, approaching the board table. "I represent the property owner. These documents have been verified by the county clerk, 3 independent surveyors, and the State Department of Transportation. My client owns the land in question." The room erupted in angry voices. Neighbors shouted questions and accusations. Karen pounded a gavel that sounded like a toy hammer. "Order, order," she screamed. "This is obviously a fraud designed to extort money from the HOA." Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Actually, Mrs. Martinez, fraud is exactly what we need to discuss. Our investigation has uncovered some interesting irregularities in HOA finances." Karen's face went white. "What investigation?" "Payments to Martinez Landscaping, owned by your brother Carlos. Security contracts with Martinez Protection Services, owned by your husband. $57,000 in unauthorized expenditures over 3 years. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop as neighbors processed this information. That is, those are legitimate expenses, Karen stammered. Approved by whom? The board has no record of voting on these contracts. Robert Chen stood up slowly. Karen, is this true? Did you authorize payments to your family's companies without board approval? Karen looked around the room like a cornered animal. Her carefully constructed kingdom was crumbling, and everyone could see it happening in real time. We can discuss this in executive session. No, Robert said firmly. We are discussing it now, in front of everyone. That was the moment Karen Martinez realized her reign was over. The woman who had terrorized neighbors for years suddenly looked small and powerless. Justice was finally coming to Willowbrook Estates. The next morning, I mailed official notices to all 96 homeowners in Willowbrook Estates. The letters were printed on legal letterhead and delivered by certified mail to ensure nobody could claim ignorance. Notice of road usage fees, the header read in bold letters. Effective immediately, all vehicles using the private road section would be subject to usage fees of $50 per month per household. Commercial vehicles, delivery trucks, and service providers would pay additional fees based on weight and frequency of use. However, I included a grandfather clause for existing residents. Anyone who had lived in the subdivision for more than 1 year could pay a reduced rate of $25 per month, provided they signed a 1-year agreement and paid in advance. My phone rang constantly for 3 days. Most callers were confused homeowners asking if the notices were legitimate. A few were angry, but most seemed resigned to paying the fees if it meant avoiding a legal battle. Karen Martinez was notably silent. On Thursday, I received a call from Margaret Foster, the neighbor who had been fined for garden gnomes. I want to pay the annual fee, she said. $25 a month is less than I was paying in Karen's bogus fines. By Friday, 43 households had agreed to the grandfather terms. The remaining residents were taking a wait-and-see approach, probably hoping Karen would find some way to fight back. They did not have to wait long. On Saturday morning, Karen appeared at my front door with 2 men in cheap suits. She looked terrible, like she had been surviving on coffee and rage for a week. These gentlemen are from Preston and Associates, she announced. They specialize in property disputes. The older lawyer stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, I am David Preston. My client believes your ownership claims are fraudulent. We demand you remove those signs immediately. I smiled and invited them all inside. Would you like to see the documents? For the next hour, I watched 3 people try to find holes in ironclad legal proof. David Preston examined every survey, every deed, every county record. His partner took photographs and made notes. Karen paced around my living room like a caged tiger. Finally, Preston closed his briefcase and stood up. Mr. Thompson, your documentation appears to be in order. Appears to be, Karen shrieked. What do you mean appears to be? I mean the property records support his claims. The road section is legally part of his property. Karen's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. Then sue him, file an injunction, do something. Preston looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Martinez, we discussed the financial realities. Legal challenges could cost $50,000 with no guarantee of success. The HOA will pay whatever it takes. Actually, I interrupted, the HOA cannot afford a legal battle. Their reserves are depleted, and they are already facing a state investigation for financial mismanagement. Karen turned on me like a rabid dog. "You son of a bitch, you planned this whole thing. I plan to use my ranch gate legally. You are the one who escalated this into warfare." Preston gathered his papers and headed for the door. "Mrs. Martinez, I strongly advise settling this matter outside of court. Mr. Thompson's position is legally sound." After they left, I poured myself a beer and sat on my porch. Across the pasture, my horses were grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. For the first time in months, I felt truly relaxed. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. By Monday evening, I had received signed agreements from 68 households. The remaining 28 were holding out, probably at Karen's urging. The community center was packed again, but the atmosphere was different. Instead of angry confusion, there was a sense of anticipation, like people watching a condemned building being demolished. Karen Martinez arrived last, flanked by her husband and brother. She looked like she was attending her own execution. Robert Chen called the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is a motion to remove Karen Martinez as HOA president. "Seconded," said Margaret Foster immediately. "All in favor?" 4 hands went up. Only one board member supported Karen. Motion carries. Karen Martinez is hereby removed as president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Karen stood up slowly, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You cannot do this to me. I built this community." "You nearly destroyed it," Robert replied calmly. As Karen stormed toward the exit, she stopped next to my chair. "This is not over," she hissed. "Yes, it is," I said quietly. "It is completely over." 2 weeks later, I watched from my kitchen window as a moving truck loaded furniture from Karen's house. She was fleeing the neighborhood she had terrorized for 6 years. Justice had finally arrived in Willowbrook Estates. 6 months later, I stood next to my ranch gate watching it swing open for the first time since Karen Martinez had it sealed. The concrete barriers were gone, hauled away by the same contractor who had installed them. A shiny new sign hung on the gate. "Henderson Ranch, established 1978, restored 2024. The road usage fees had generated more money than I expected. Not only had all 96 households eventually signed agreements, but I was also collecting fees from delivery companies, service providers, and emergency services. The monthly income allowed me to expand my stables, upgrade my fencing, and install a new irrigation system. More importantly, the neighborhood had transformed. Robert Chen was elected as the new HOA president, and his first act was to repeal most of Karen's ridiculous restrictions. Garden gnomes reappeared in front yards. American flags flew proudly from porches. Children's toys were scattered across lawns without fear of citations. The state investigation into HOA finances had resulted in criminal charges against Karen Martinez. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and was sentenced to 2 years of probation and full restitution to the HOA. Her brother's landscaping company was banned from all municipal contracts, and her husband's security firm was under federal investigation. Margaret Foster knocked on my door one afternoon carrying a plate of homemade cookies and a bottle of wine. "I wanted to thank you," she said, settling into a chair on my porch. "For the first time in years, I am not afraid to walk to my mailbox." "You did not deserve what she put you through." "None of us did, but you were the only one with the courage to fight back." I looked across my property at the horses grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. The ranch was everything I had dreamed it would be, and more. But the best part was knowing that 96 families could finally live without fear. A hay truck rumbled through my gate, heading toward the barn. The driver waved as he passed, and I waved back. Simple agricultural operations, nothing threatening or dangerous, just the way Frank Henderson had intended when he built this place in 1978. That evening, I called Frank at his retirement home in Arizona. He was 91 now, but his voice was still strong. "I heard about what happened," he said with a chuckle. "Karen Martinez picked a fight with the wrong rancher. I just defended what was mine." "You did more than that, son. You reminded people that bullies only have power if we give it to them." As the sun set over my 50 acres, I reflected on the lessons learned. Sometimes justice requires patience. Sometimes it requires strategy. And sometimes it requires standing up to people who think they can take what does not belong to them. Karen Martinez thought she could steal my gate and my rights. Instead, she lost everything. The ranch was finally at peace.